Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a privilege to speak in this debate. I'm one of the co-sponsors of the debate, but the entire credit for the idea belongs to the Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead. He quite rightly identified that what we needed was a cross-party, less partisan, as it turns out non-binding debate which will allow everybody to explore these issues properly in the national interest without being fettered by feelings of joining one side or other in the playground of politics. Now, the result of that has been very good. I think this has been the best debate so far on this subject of a number. But it does fall on us all to be honest about it. This policy was a mistake. One can only think that because I don't think anybody in any party in this House would deliberately have impoverished the working poor with dependent families. And I'm afraid I do differentiate in this context. That simply was not intended, I'm sure. The problem was it was compounded by the method, no, not for the moment, not for the moment. It was compounded by the method taken of having a statutory instrument, therefore it's unamendable, and not having enough information, not having a proper impact statement. I think 4 or 5 members in this debate so far have made that point. Had it been amendable, had it been primary legislation, had there been proper information available from the government, then this would not have got to the House of Lords in its current form. It would have been reformed in this House, and that's what should have happened. Now, I subscribe to the government's wish to balance the books by 2020. I think that's an eminently sensible and responsible aim, and I also subscribe to the view that we need to protect the poor at all costs under these circumstances. The problem is, how do we actually identify what the policy does? And I tried to find some examples for which we could actually assess both sides of the argument, not just the attack, but also the government's line. And I offer my thanks, by the way, to the Chancellor's PPS, my honourable friend, the member for Kingswood, in helping with that, who was very, very helpful. And I was able to put some of the points he made in defence of the policy to the library. And I'll just pick out a couple of examples as to what the impact of this policy was. The worst case example I could find was that of a working single parent with 2 children who, without the mitigating effects, could have been £2,000 a year worse off in virtually every year up until 2020, a completely unbelievable sum of money to take off a family that's already poor. Now, under the circumstances in which they're eligible for the mitigation, in particular housing benefit, that can be reduced to 700 to around about £700. The fine detail is unreliable. But £700 virtually every year again for the next 4 or 5 years. Now, remember, the great battle when the other side was in power over the 10% rate was over sums that were a quarter of that. The great battles over the poll tax were over sums of that size. I remember them too well. And the impact on a family which is already on the poverty line by definition is unspeakable and unthinkable. And I speak as somebody who grew up in a rather poorer era, and I can remember children being hungry on Friday when the bills were just a bit too big, or it was too cold and the heating costs were too high. So that is what we're dealing with here. Now, there are 3 possible strategies.
Would my right honourable friend give way?
I will, yes.
Just before the right honourable member moves on to his 3 possible strategies, he touched upon the issue of housing benefits mitigating some of the changes in tax credits. Is that not, again, one of the issues with this policy? Somebody receiving housing benefits living in rented accommodation would see mitigation within the current system, but somebody who has bought their own property would not.
That's exactly right. And before people think, well, somebody who's got their own house is better off, many of the people who are in this category are people who've fallen into it, and then get out of it later. So, it's a very, very serious consideration that, £2,000 is just an untenable thought that somebody with 2 children to support and on less than £20,000 a year themselves. So, I'm going to separate the strategies into 3. The Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead said 4, but firstly, one possibility is we shift the burden elsewhere. That was his proposal, I think, shifted up the income scale and so on. Lord Lawson said the same in the House of Lords during the debate there. And that's possible. but I'm not going to elaborate on it because I think that there are better ways. The second one is to find savings elsewhere. Now, here I did very much disagree with the Right Honourable Gentleman for Birkenhead in his almost encouragement of the Chancellor to go hunting for the pensioner pound, because it won't be today's pensioner's pound to go hunting for, it's tomorrow's pensioner's pound. By taking out the tax benefits of investing in pensions and undermining what we have left of our private pension scheme. I'm protected, virtually all my pensions paid for now, but it's the next generation that have to worry about that. So this will be a very unwise route to go. I do give way to the Honourable Gentleman. Right on.
Report to the Honourable Gentleman giving me. I thought my argument would have more appeal the other side because it was a free market one. That when governments have actually guaranteed a minimum, it's not our business to put our sticky fingers in other people's lives to tell them how they should save or not save. Once you've got a minimum pension agreement to everybody, how people save, when they save, how they save is not a question for this House.
I won't go too far down the road. I shall just say to him this, that for middle-class pensioners, actually one of the highest effective income tax rates in the country now, 55% on people who've actually saved a lot for their pension and gone above the lifetime allowance. So I think we've got to be a bit careful. If you let the Treasury at that deferred income, they'll take as much as they can. So I just think it's not a route which is wise. The third option, which I think is probably the winner in this, it will not be by itself, but it will have to be modified, is to stage the cuts. And I think the Right Honourable Gentleman also lit upon this, to match movements in minimum wage and living wage so that people do not lose. After all, the government's figures for 2020 broadly look like they balance. They broadly look like they balance. They're not perfect, and we have to work through the mitigation. This is where we have the impact statement again. We have to work through the mitigation carefully. But broadly they balance, and they do two things. One, they protect the working poor. But on the other hand, they also achieve the deficit reduction. And that is vital, because if we hit that deficit reduction by 2020, as my honourable friend spoke earlier, said, this is not going to, each year's saving, each $4 billion a year is not critical. It's less than 1% of the economy. It's not critical. But the real critical issue is how the financial markets see it. And the financial markets don't care what the trajectory is from here to 2020. Just the fact that we get there is good enough. So we don't need to worry about the $4 billion a year in between. We do need to worry about the final outcome. So my argument would be that we should cut the tax credits in steps, in step with minimum wage and living wage. The criterion is what's important here. The criterion that the government must meet is that no losses for the least well off in any of those three intervening years. No losses for the least well off. The poorest, the working poor, the dependents cannot afford to lose £1. And so that's the test the government has to meet. After all, I was never a great fan of the minimum wage, but one of the things that persuaded me that it was worthwhile, and I'm afraid I've taken two interventions, I'll lose time. One of the things that persuaded me was actually some social data that showed the minimum wage cut crime. It led to a reduction in crime. And we mustn't lose sight of the social impact of these things, the distress on families, the breakup on families, pushing people towards food banks, pushing people towards worse, towards loan sharks, pushing people into petty crime. Those are the things we have to think about, and there is a cost on those too. The IFS said to the Honourable Gentleman's Committee that the government could hit the 2020 target on a staged route. So that's what we should do. That's what we should aim for. We can achieve the fiscal target and still remain faithful to conservative one nation aims, which after all has been the leitmotif of the last few months for us. And that's something we should do, and if we do, then the Chancellor would have good reason to be proud of his achievement.